The Sound of Music, 1965, captured hearts around the world with its unforgettable music, stunning scenery, and heartfelt performances. But while the film remains a joyful classic, the real-life stories of its beloved cast hold moments of deep sadness. Over the decades, many of the stars who made this film iconic have passed away, some quietly, others tragically. In this video, we take a closer look at the lives behind the characters, exploring their triumphs, struggles, and the circumstances surrounding their passing. Join us as we remember the remarkable actors who brought this timeless story to life. Christopher Plummer was born on December 13, 1929, and played the role of Captain George Von Trapp in 1965 at the age of 36, bringing to life the character of a rigid Austrian naval officer who gradually reveals his deep capacity for love and vulnerability. Despite being hailed as one of the greatest classical actors of his generation, Plummer endured a career shadowed by dissatisfaction. He famously disdained the sound of music for years, calling it gooey and expressing regret that it overshadowed his more serious Shakespearean work. Plummer married 3 times. His first marriage to actress Tammy Grimes bore one daughter, Amanda, but ended in a bitter divorce. Amanda and Christopher remained estranged for much of their lives. His second marriage lasted only 4 years and dissolved in a flurry of accusations and emotional distance. Although his third marriage to Elaine Taylor brought some stability, it could never quite fill the void left by years of emotional withdrawal and professional disillusionment. Plummer battled lifelong alcohol dependence, which led to multiple stints in rehabilitation and left scars in both his liver and his psyche. He also carried deep guilt over his absence from his daughter's upbringing and the breakdown of his early family. Christopher Plummer passed away on February 5, 2021, at the age of 91 due to complications from a fall. Richard Heiden was born on March 10, 1905, and took on the role of Max Detweiler in 1965 at age 60, infusing the character with a delightful mix of wit, opportunism, and hidden heart. Max was the comedic relief, the charming manipulator who preferred to sidestep moral dilemmas, an ironic contrast to Heiden's real life, which was marked by inner torment and solitude. After the war, Hollywood had little room for men like Heiden, and he retreated into supporting roles that paid the bills but left his artistic soul hungry. Heiden never married and had no children, choosing instead to live in almost monastic privacy. Rumors swirled for years about his sexuality, but he never confirmed anything publicly, afraid that the truth would destroy the fragile career he had built. The loneliness was compounded by the loss of his brother to suicide in 1943, an event that haunted him for decades. Heiden's lifelong battle with anxiety led him to become increasingly withdrawn, often declining public appearances and spending days without speaking to anyone. He was also deeply disillusioned by the shifting tides of Hollywood, where age and subtlety were no longer assets. Richard Heiden died of a heart attack on April 25, 1985, at the age of 80. Eleanor Parker was born on June 26, 1922, and played Baroness Elsa von Schrader in 1965 at the age of 43, embodying the poised and polished socialite who tried to mold love into something transactional, only to be outshined by Maria's genuine warmth. Known in the 1950s as the Woman of 1,000 Faces, Parker's career thrived briefly before descending into obscurity, her Oscar nominations soon gathering dust in a lonely home. Despite her talent, she often found herself cast aside for younger, flashier stars. Eleanor was married 4 times. Her first marriage to Navy dentist Fred Loss lasted barely a year. Her second husband, producer Bert Friedlob, was controlling and manipulative, a man more interested in her career's financial yield than her heart. Their marriage produced 3 children, but the domestic environment was far from nurturing. Her third marriage ended in emotional collapse, and though her fourth husband, Raymond Hirsch, provided a semblance of normalcy, her earlier heartbreaks had left emotional bruises that never healed. Parker struggled with bouts of depression, worsened by a period of financial decline when roles dried up. She became a recluse in her later years, refusing interviews and rarely leaving her home. Eleanor Parker died on December 9, 2013, at the age of 91 from pneumonia. Peggy Wood was born on February 9, 1892, and stepped into the role of the Mother Abbess in 1965 at age 73, delivering a performance filled with grace and spiritual wisdom, the embodiment of unwavering support and benevolent strength. Yet this matronly figure was a far cry from the actress's own life, which was riddled with hidden tragedies. Wood had found success in early Broadway and silent films, but by the 1950s, roles had all but disappeared, leading her to question her purpose in a changing world that no longer revered older women. She had only one child, a son named David, whom she adored, but their relationship grew strained as he struggled with drug addiction and bouts of mental illness. Peggy's marriage to writer John Weaver was one of emotional distance, maintained more for societal appearance than for love, and she spent most of her later years alone in a house filled with photographs rather than laughter. The silence became unbearable. As age took her hearing and most of her eyesight, Wood grew increasingly paranoid, convinced she was being forgotten. In her final years, she was reportedly tormented by hallucinations and a terror of dying alone. Peggy Wood passed away from a stroke on March 18, 1978, at the age of 86, her death closing the curtain on a life once filled with spotlight, now remembered mostly for a single soaring song. Heather Menzies Urich was born on December 3, 1949, and portrayed Louisa Von Trapp in 1965 at the age of 16, bringing to life the role of the high-spirited and mischievous middle child of the Von Trapp family. Heather's post-Sound of Music career never reached the same heights. She appeared in cult horror films like Piranha, 1978, and television series throughout the 1970s, yet always remained in the shadow of her early success, unable to shake the child star label. Her marriage to actor Robert Urich was publicly celebrated, but privately marred by financial difficulties and long periods of separation due to his demanding schedule and later illness. They had 3 children, including 2 adopted, but the weight of caregiving and sacrifice fell largely on Heather as Robert battled cancer for years before his death. Heather herself faced a series of health issues, culminating in a diagnosis of terminal brain cancer. She also struggled for decades with survivor's guilt after the early deaths of several of her Sound of Music co-stars and her parents, leading her into periods of isolation and depression. After losing Robert, she never remarried and spent her final years advocating for cancer awareness, even while suffering in silence. She died on December 24, 2017, at the age of 68, from brain cancer. Charmian Carr was born on December 27, 1942, and portrayed Liesl Von Trapp in 1965 at age 23, capturing the wistful innocence and longing of a teenager discovering first love and identity. But her portrayal of youthful joy was in stark contrast to the sorrow that would come to dominate her real life. After The Sound of Music, Carr was typecast and quickly abandoned her acting career, trapped by a role she could never surpass. She married dentist Jay Brent and had 2 daughters, Jennifer and Emily, but the union was plagued by emotional distance and eventually ended in divorce. Carr later admitted that her marriage was more an escape than a commitment, and she lived with regret over choosing stability over passion. Financial struggles followed, and though she opened an interior design firm, the business never truly fulfilled her. Her daughter Jennifer battled chronic illness, and Carr spent much of her time caretaking, which left her emotionally and physically exhausted. In her later years, she suffered from increasing cognitive decline, with dementia stealing away her memories, including the joy of her brief fame. She was often confused and angry, and family members noted how she wept when hearing 16 going on 17, unsure why it made her sad. Charmian Carr died on September 17, 2016, at the age of 73 due to complications from dementia. Anna Lee was born on January 2, 1913, and stepped into the role of Sister Margareta in 1965 at the age of 52, embodying a kind and understanding nun who, unlike her stricter counterparts, saw Maria's potential and spirit. Her character offered a rare warmth and sense of empathy within the confines of the abbey. Off-screen, Anna Lee's career once soared in British cinema, often hailed as the British bombshell during the 1930s and 40s, but after moving to Hollywood, she was gradually reduced to supporting roles, her talents wasted on typecasting. Her personal life took a grim turn when her husband, director Robert Stevenson, divorced her for a younger woman after years of growing apart, leaving her emotionally devastated. They had 5 children, but one of her sons, Jeffrey, died in a tragic plane crash, a loss that haunted her until the end. In the 1980s, a devastating car accident left her paralyzed from the waist down. Confined to a wheelchair, she continued to act in General Hospital, defiant yet physically and emotionally exhausted. Though she remained on television screens, her heart was broken from a life of loss, loneliness, and forgotten fame. Anna Lee died on May 14, 2004, at the age of 91 from pneumonia. Martyne Nixon was born on February 22, 1930, and played Sister Sophia in The Sound of Music in 1965 when she was 35. As the cheerful and musically gifted nun, Sister Sophia brought warmth and lightheartedness to the Abbey scenes, mirroring Nixon's own rich vocal background. However, her career was a bittersweet tale. She was one of Hollywood's most prolific ghost singers, providing the singing voices for major stars like Audrey Hepburn in My Fair Lady and Natalie Wood in West Side Story, yet receiving no credit or public recognition at the time. This lack of acknowledgement haunted her for decades, and her contribution to cinema was largely invisible until late in life. Martyne married composer Ernest Gold, with whom she had 3 children, but their marriage ended in divorce, and her home life was marred by the early death of their son, Andrew, a talented musician, which devastated her. Professionally, despite her exceptional talent, she was typecast and underappreciated, often relegated to the shadows while others took the spotlight. She also faced financial hardship due to unpaid royalties and lack of industry protection. In her later years, Nixon battled breast cancer, which drained her energy as she continued to teach and perform. She passed away on July 24, 2016, at the age of 86, from complications of the disease, her brilliance dimmed by a lifetime spent behind the curtain. Gilchrist Stewart was born on January 19, 1919, and took on the role of Franz, the butler, in The Sound of Music in 1965 at the age of 46. In the film, Franz was the loyal yet secretive household servant whose stern demeanor masked conflicting loyalties, embodying quiet tension beneath the polished surface. Stewart, a classically trained British stage actor, struggled to gain traction in the American film industry and spent years in obscurity, performing in minor roles on television and uncredited film parts. His career, marked by missed opportunities and long stretches of unemployment, never reached the heights his early promise suggested. In his personal life, Stewart never married and lived alone for most of his adult years. He was rumored to have been engaged in a closeted relationship with another actor during the conservative mid-century Hollywood era, a fact that reportedly caused deep rifts with his religious family in England. The resulting estrangement left him emotionally isolated, and he rarely spoke of his past in interviews. In his later years, Stewart battled depression and alcohol dependence, which further distanced him from peers and left him financially strained. He died on June 20, 1977, at the age of 58 from cancer, in a small Los Angeles apartment, alone and largely forgotten by the industry he once fought so hard to belong to. Portia Nelson was born on May 27, 1920, and played Sister Baird in 1965 when she was 45, portraying the stern and skeptical nun who openly questioned Maria's suitability for convent life. Her role reflected discipline and disapproval, often standing in contrast to the more forgiving Sister Margareta. Portia was a multi-talented artist, an author, lyricist, and singer, but her creative path was consistently sabotaged by missed opportunities and industry biases. Her autobiography and poetry collection There's a Hole in My Sidewalk touched on deep personal suffering and the fragility of the human spirit, reflecting the emotional weight she carried. She never married, stating once in an interview that love never lasted long enough to matter. Though she had several deep relationships, she lived most of her life alone and childless. Her greatest companion was her art, yet even that betrayed her as cancer slowly robbed her of her voice and strength. She survived breast cancer once, only for it to return with a vengeance later in life. Adding to her suffering, she endured decades of rejection for being openly gay in a time of rampant discrimination, leading to long periods of depression and reclusion. Portia Nelson passed away on March 6, 2001, at the age of 80 from cancer. Norma Varden was born on January 20, 1898, and played Frau Schmidt in 1965 at the age of 67, giving life to the dignified and no-nonsense housekeeper of the Von Trapp family. Her character, though not emotionally expressive, served as a stern and orderly presence in the household, a mirror to the rigid structure the children lived under before Maria's arrival. Varden had once been a celebrated concert pianist before switching to acting due to chronic arthritis in her hands, a cruel twist of fate that stripped her of her first passion. She carved a niche for herself in film, often cast as upper-class women or housekeepers, but never given the chance to lead. She never married, devoting her life to her mother, who she cared for until her passing. After her mother's death, Norma became increasingly reclusive, battling periods of depression and paranoia. She was reportedly swindled by a trusted financial advisor late in life, losing most of her savings and forcing her to take on roles she found demeaning. She eventually moved into a retirement home for actors, where she spent her final years in declining health and near anonymity. Norma Varden died on January 19, 1989, just one day before her 91st birthday, from heart failure. Ben Wright was born on May 5, 1915, and took on the role of Herr Zeller in 1965 at age 50, embodying the threatening Nazi official whose presence brought fear and tension into the Von Trapp household. His character was cold, authoritarian, and unyielding, a stark contrast to the warmth of the family he sought to control. Before The Sound of Music, Ben enjoyed moderate success in both British and American radio and film, but he was never considered a leading man. Typecast as villains and background characters, Ben's aspirations to become a theatrical force dwindled into bitterness. He married once, to a fellow stage actress, but their relationship deteriorated due to his workaholism and growing resentment over her more successful Broadway career. They had one daughter, Emily, with whom he had a strained relationship after the divorce, rarely seeing her as he moved frequently for work. He struggled financially in his later years, and as his health declined, he found himself increasingly isolated. Plagued by arthritis and heart disease, he lived alone in a modest apartment, cut off from the industry that had long forgotten him. Ben Wright died on July 2, 1989, at the age of 74 from heart failure. Doris Lloyd was born on July 3, 1896, and played the role of Baroness Eberfeld in The Sound of Music in 1965 at the age of 69. In the film, she portrayed a proud, upper-crust guest at the Von Trapp party, exuding grace and the remnants of aristocratic snobbery. Lloyd's own life had a similarly regal veneer. She began her acting career on stage in England before transitioning to Hollywood in the silent film era. Yet behind the career longevity was a tale of relentless survival. After the sudden death of her fiancé in World War I, Lloyd never married, devoting herself to acting as both passion and refuge. She worked in over 150 films, many without credit, accepting roles that offered little prestige in order to pay bills and support her ailing parents. Her quiet sacrifices went unnoticed, and as she aged, the film offers dwindled. By the 1960s, she was living in a modest Hollywood apartment, taking on minor parts to supplement a meager income. Her health deteriorated rapidly in the late 60s, worsened by the emotional toll of lifelong solitude and professional obscurity. Doris Lloyd died on May 21, 1968, at the age of 71 from heart failure, in near anonymity, a once prolific performer whose legacy faded with time. Gertrude Aster was born on November 9, 1887, and appeared as a party guest in The Sound of Music in 1965 at the age of 78. As a stately and refined attendee of the Von Trapp family's soiree, her presence added vintage charm to the scene. But behind the poised figure was a woman who had once been a trailblazer in silent films, only to be largely discarded by the time color and sound took over. Aster was one of the first actresses to sign a long-term contract in Hollywood, appearing in countless silent films. Yet with the advent of talkies, she found herself typecast, aging out of leading roles and relegated to bit parts. She never married, citing her devotion to career, but close friends suspected she had suffered a devastating heartbreak in her 30s from which she never fully recovered. She spent her final decades living in a small boarding house, surrounded by fading photographs and memories of a bygone era. One of the most painful chapters of her life was witnessing the deaths of all her siblings and closest friends, leaving her utterly alone by the 1970s. Gertrude Aster died on November 9, 1977, from a stroke, on her 90th birthday, a forgotten star who had once shone so brightly in silent shadows. Who is your favorite character in The Sound of Music? How do you feel knowing that the actors have passed away? Feel free to leave your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this content, don't forget to like, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell so you don't miss future videos. Thank you so much.